What's up YouTube? Today we are looking at Sonible's Smart EQ 3. So this is a particularly interesting EQ plugin which not only functions as a traditional EQ but also has a bit of an AI learning system kind of built in. So what it does is it basically analyzes your signal. You apply various different kind of presets. Say for example, you've got a recording of a guitar that you want to clean up, or recording of drums or something that you want to clean up. You can apply specific kind of algorithms for a guitar or drums or whatever the case is. So, you know, for me, I make electronic music, so this might not be as interesting at first glance. However, knowing that you can customize and create your own profiles, I think is really cool, because that can speed up the process. Say, for example, there's particular things that you often find are a problem in your mix. So for me, I often find that like my lower mid-range, like 200 to 400 hertz, may be a little bit too pronounced, or my kind of harsh range between kind of 2 to 4 kilohertz might be a little bit pronounced. And, you know, having an EQ that's already tweaked to reduce those settings based on an analysis curve that it takes, I think is particularly interesting. So I want to discuss most of the features in this video and show you guys why I think this is such an exciting plugin. So of course I can already sense we're going to have those use your ears bros type of comments, and yes, 100% absolutely, you do need to use your ears when creating music, but I think stuff like this is particularly helpful. Some of us may not have perfectly trained ears, we may not have ideal listening environments, and also the ears are adaptive. You know, if we're listening to a bassy mix for hours straight, the next thing that we listen to is probably going to sound like it lacks a little bit of bass. So anyway, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sonible for actually sending me this plugin for the purpose of this video. That being said, they didn't actually alter my opinions. I've been excited about this plugin since I first read about it, and I've actually been considering getting it myself. So when they contacted me, I was actually very stoked about that. The custom profiles thing fits my idea of referencing to a specific curve quite well. If you guys don't know, I'm a huge proponent of referencing to specific frequency curves and, you know, mixing according to those. And, you know, maybe not exact, but it's a very quick and easy way of being able to tell where problem areas might be in your mix that you can then go and fix actually in the mix. So quickly before we dive in, I want to show you an example of what a finished mix sounds like with a custom profile that I've created and just fine-tuned a little bit. I'm going to just bypass and unbypass so you guys can kind of hear exactly what the plugin is doing. Then I'm going to dive into all the features of the plugin. Anyway, let's dive in and have a look. What I picked up from that is that there are elements in the mid and the kind of high mids that are creating a bit of a kind of boxy sound. And the moment that I use my custom profile to determine like which of those sounds needs to be kind of reduced, as you can see, it's kind of like applied the profile to the specific mix. You can actually dial in the exact settings. If you want less or more, you can dial in the exact frequencies that it's applying to, which is pretty cool. I want to show you guys quickly how to make a custom profile and also just some other things about the plugin which I think are particularly interesting. So what I want to do is I want to use FX Grid in Bitwig to generate a kind of flat noise curve. As you can see here, the pink noise is kind of a little bit sloped. So I want to create a as flat as we can get. So I'm going to use the FX Grid with a combination of a, let's see if the high shelf will work. To just flatten out, we can maybe reduce the Q here, just so we have a more or less kind of flat frequency across the board. Okay, I think that's close enough. So now what I want to do is I want to load my reference preset. What we can do is we can actually go like this and Sidetrans mixing reference 1. And you'll see I've got a kind of reference that I've grabbed from one of my favorite tracks. And often I will mix my tracks according to this. So you'll see here, this is often a problem area in mixes, is the kind of 300 to 800 hertz region and the kind of 3 to 7K region. So actually here you see we've got a little bit where it's under. We can actually just gain this up a little bit just so we've got more of an accurate reference there. What's happening with the lows. Often with the Smart EQ, I do end up removing the processing that's happening on the lows anyway, which I will discuss a little bit later. Here, maybe we can adjust the tilt of this EQ just a little bit more, just to get the sound a little bit more kind of even down to that top peak there, as you guys can see. There we go. Okay, that's close enough. So now what I want to do is I want to put Smart EQ before Curve EQ, which is my reference tool. And I want to pop this open, and we actually just want to set everything back to default. And so here, what I want to do is I just want to start adding in nodes, so we can actually just use this to analyze this sound source, so that it knows it's just a kind of flat frequency noise coming through. We don't want to apply this. We want to add our own EQ nodes over here to kind of fine tune the spectrum so that it fits into this curve from the reference. I hope you guys are following. So let's actually just make these windows a little bit smaller. And you can see here, like if we put this up, you can see in that curve EQ, it adjusts for it. So what we want to do is kind of just carve out the spectrum that we see from the reference. We can use the Q settings over here to just fine tune it a little bit, boost this up a little bit, and then we got some in the high mids here as well, which we can remove. So you see, what we've done now is we've kind of carved out that kind of mid smiley. We do still want some of this mid presence around kind of 1K, so we can maybe just add a little bump here to make up for that, but maybe not make it so wide, and then we can kind of choose where we want it to be. Okay, that's looking good. That's looking good. So now what we want to do is we want to press save, and then we can just call this, for example, dash glitch full. I already made one, so we can just call this full mix 2, and it's going to say, do you want to save the custom profile because you've already got some analysis and stuff, and it's going to reset that. Yes, we do. And then what happens is it applies that same curve that we've created now to the signal. So what we can do is we can go and I actually just want to move this and this, so we have just Smart EQ on the channel. We can now play our track and fine tune the settings here. So like I said, you can change the frequency of what is being affected by the sound. So generally, I don't want to touch anything kind of below 100 hertz because that's the kind of meat and gravy of the track. And sometimes I don't want to touch too much of the high end because you can often hear that, you can hear it quite a lot in these kind of EQs when you do too much work in the high end. So here we have the strength, and this would basically change how much it affects the sound source. And dynamics, this is interesting because it then uses kind of like a spectral compression or dynamic EQs on each of these bands. And you can actually see that being applied in the GUI, which is pretty interesting. So check this out. Now I want to talk about the grouping system which Smart EQ has built in, which I think is really interesting for various reasons. I've got this track that I'm working on here, and I've got several groups, for example, kick and bass, percussions, synths, sound effects. So we can, for example, jump into like the kicks, and we can put a Smart EQ over here. And then what we can do is we can put a Smart EQ on the bass. Now what we can do is we can say, for example, with the kicks, say join group, and we can add here kick and bass. We can say create group, we can now remove this and we can open the one that we added to the base and we can say join group. You can see it's now picked up that we've added the group kick and bass. So now we can add this to the group, and you can actually see now we can access both of these and see actually what's going on within a kind of group instance, which is really cool. So you can actually see the frequency spectrum of what's happening there. So what we can do is we can actually expand this a little bit. For example, like the percussions, we can just put in like a single group. So let's just put Smart EQ over here. Let's say join group, create a new one. Let's call this a join group. Let's add it to the kick and bass group, but we can put it on a different instance over here. And you see how it gives you the curve of each of the channels from within the one plugin interface, which I think is really, really helpful. So we can say, for example, see what was happening with the bass, jump in there and say, okay, no, we don't want to process too much of the bass, but we do want it to accentuate a little bit of that top end. I think it like predicted that it needed some of that. And then just to top it off, what I want to do is I want to add an instance to the kind of mix channel. And what we can do is we can go like this and say it was DG full mix was the one that we used or that we created. So now we can just analyze this and apply this curve. Then let's fine tune it so that it's not affecting too much of the lows and the highs and just reduce the amount of strength overall. And then this is pretty cool, is that you can kind of bypass the entire rack from within the single instance. So actually, you know what we can do is we can put this mix here, put the kicks here, so that it's kind of like kick and bass on a single lane, synths and perks on a single lane. I'm not quite sure what the lanes actually do. And then we can quickly bypass all to hear what the entire mix, what all 5 EQs are doing to the entire mix, which I think is really cool. And then just to tie it all together, let's just add a bit of the smart comp. So I figured there's probably a couple of people watching this video who aren't too into the electronic music genre. So I prepared a couple of examples that are a little bit more traditional. That being said, this kind of stuff is not my forte. I just figured that this project that I'm putting together is kind of a good example to outline how useful something like Smart EQ or Smart Compressor could be. Specifically, if we don't know too much about producing like a traditional genre, being able to have guidelines as to how to EQ things and how to compress things is definitely going to help. So I want to show you a couple of pre and post examples, and I'm going to bypass them and see if you guys can kind of, you guys can tell me your thoughts in the comments. So anyway, here's the track that I'm working on. First, we're going to start off with some examples of Smart EQ. So I like how with Smart EQ, you can kind of visualize the entire group and bypass everything in the project with one switch. I feel like that makes things a little bit easier to kind of like get, specifically if you're doing these kind of like, I don't want to say simpler mixes because, you know, they're not really, but like with not as many elements, you know, we've just got like drums, bass, 2 guitars that are actually grouped, synths that are grouped and stuff. So there's only really kind of 5 groups and then a master channel on here. So with these kind of more clinical EQ tasks, I find that bypassing everything to really hear what each of the channels is doing, or being able to like jump into each one and bypass those individually, I think is a super powerful tool. So what I picked up is that it's definitely sorting out a very boxy kind of sum of those channels in the mid-range, and it's kind of definitely sorting those out, and it's cleaning up the mid-range very nicely. Yeah, maybe you guys can let me know what you think in the comments. Awesome, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, big thanks to Sonible for actually making this video possible. And if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that like button. I will see you guys next time. Cheers.